We're going to look at tab B, market landscape. This is very similar. It's practically the same as what we did last year. Some of the data changed, but the majority of it did not. So let's actually focus this time on the data sources, because this is probably one of the uniquer groupings of data that we express, certainly because we didn't used to do this in the past. And I think this gives us an edge over not only our internal field force understanding what we're talking about, but certainly an edge over our competition as well. And I know all of us have at some point expressed the market opportunity to hospitals, and that is the edge I'm referring to. I think knowing that there is disease out there and being able to express it in numbers and forecasting is a big deal, because it shows our commitment to this space. So the source of the data, there's a lot of different sources. First, I'll just mention I pulled, for inputs, I pulled the entire state of South Carolina. So what we're looking at, just in case you're curious, is every county and every city in South Carolina, okay? So back to market landscape. The sum of the population. So this is telling us that there's 4.5 million people in that state, of which 1.1 are at risk for they're at risk for vascular disease, not at risk for aortic, but at risk for vascular disease, and I'll come back to this. 600,000 are Medicare patients. That means they're 65 and over. 350,000 are smokers, et cetera. And prevalence, again, prevalence is the number of people who may have disease versus incidence, which is the number of people who will develop disease in a year, right? So this is a rate. This is incidence represents time. So how many people within a year who would develop AAA versus how many people likely in the, walking around in the population have AAA. Same for PAD, and there you go. All right, so the source of this is the same as it was last time. So these numbers will look the same as what you've pulled up on your other Spotfire data tables. And that is the U.S. Census. The U.S. Census is taken biennially. That's every 10 years. So we will never be able to acquire new data until, 2020, 2021, when the data is released. That's okay. That's not an issue. I'm not labeling that as a complaint or a concern about our data. Just understand that the source of the data is the U.S. Census, and that tells us the population size. These other numbers are forecasts, which are based on literature, telling us various risk factors. Well, actually, at risk is based on literature. AAA and PAD are based on literature. Medicare age numbers, that's just population again, so that is the U.S. Census. And smokers comes from the CDC, the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Study, which is a 40-year-long study where patients self-report their status as a smoker or former smoker. At risk is also based on the U.S. Census, but it's also based on the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Study as well, because the way we arrive at that number is understanding who in these communities has age or another risk factor like hypertension, high cholesterol, obesity, things like that. That helps us understand how many people may be at risk. So just understand this is mostly U.S. Census and the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Study, which is a CDC study. This is the sum of this. So same numbers, right? If you were to download all this data on this table, table B2, all these zip codes, they will all add up. The population will all add up to this number here. The DTC eligible, I should relabel that. So DTC eligible is the same thing as at risk. It just means the people that are over 40 and have diabetes, over 50 with a risk factor, or over 60. That's this number here, at risk. The risk factor here, 40 and diabetes. Risk factor over here is 50 to 60 with a risk factor such as hypertension or high cholesterol. And then the last risk factor grouping is the age group over 60. If you sum these numbers, 236, 629, 3,063, you'll get this number, 3,928. Okay? So this is just the detail table for this. Okay, again, we're going to go down to mortality. This is CDC data as well. Mortality is a 5-year run rate here. We started with 2010, ended with 2014. and it's the mortality from heart attacks, strokes, AAAs, and thoracic aneurysms. It's important to know that data is not shared publicly if it's less than 10 patients. So all these smaller counties where you see 0, in fact, this is a really small county, really small, because if you're seeing only 37 heart attack deaths or 20 stroke deaths, that's tiny compared to other communities where you see up in the thousands. So there's no way you'll have numbers to represent the mortality around aortic disease when you have such a small, small population. So let's see, I just passed one. Charleston County, you're in the 200s as far as heart attack deaths and 150 or so for stroke deaths annually. And in this case, you can also see that because we're over 10, this data point for AAA was counted. And you see that in that year they had 11 deaths, okay? Just because it's blank, don't assume it's empty. It's not that it's empty, it's that it's not over 10, okay? This is not a good map to look at when you're looking at the entire state. So for the sake of this, I will choose 2 counties. Choose Greenville and Lancaster. All right, just 2 counties. Now that you have a good comparison, you can say that, assuming you were looking at both markets, if you were to choose one and you were going to choose on volume, you could easily say that there's a lot more disease in Greenville than there is in Lancaster, where you have 30,000 people at risk for PAD and 4,600 people at risk for AAA. This is the incidence number. This is the prevalence number, just like it's labeled. Also, because we chose Greenville and Lancaster, that showed us only the implanting hospitals that are associated with Greenville and Lancaster. So let's go back to our inputs and pick a few more counties. And hopefully our list will be a little broader, just for the sake of this exercise. Okay, so now you see there's a fair amount more hospitals that are doing EVAR and TVAR. I'm sure there are many, many other hospitals, behavioral health institutes, children's hospitals, things like that, or even community hospitals where there's not an active AAA program. They're not on this list. This is only the hospitals that we know of that are implanting hospitals. Again, this F, forecast. So EVAR forecasts for this year and TVAR forecasts for this year. This forecast is based on information like Jason mentioned in the meeting in Minneapolis. It just means that we looked at their volume of procedures in the past, maybe last year, and we interviewed the rep, and we took local knowledge, and we combined that to come up with this number. It may be very, very similar, if not the same as to last year's number, but sometimes these numbers are significantly higher or lower based on information we find out from the rep, like a surgeon is leaving or a change is taking place in the administration, and so we don't, for whatever reason, these numbers can be higher or lower based on local knowledge, but they are forecasts. And of course, you can't forecast what changes will occur in this year. And so it just helps us understand what the market's like in that community. And again, just like all of our other data, it's relative. It only tells me, without having any local knowledge, I would say that Conway would not be an excellent target if Conway Medical Center is in the same community as Myrtle Beach or Grandstand Regional Hospital, just given the size, just given the volume alone. That's not a good assumption to make without any knowledge, but that's the point of this, is it just gives you little bits of knowledge so you can be a little bit more armed with information when talking to Salesforce people or your hospitals. That's it for this page, and thanks for watching. Bye.